Hey, McKinney here. We will start a new note-taking strategy that we'll use throughout the rest of the year. We'll alternate. This one is called Cornell Notes. So if you look, your paper is already divided into two sections for you. You have the title of your notes at the top, and then your notes with a couple fill-in-the-blanks that we'll fill out as we go along. Later, you will come back to these notes to write study questions and help you study, as well as to summarize your notes. If you review your notes, you quiz yourself with those questions, and review your summaries, you should earn better test grades. Alright, so to start with scientific method, we're thinking like a scientist, we're recording like a scientist, and we're reflecting like a scientist. That's the mission of our interactive notebooks. So what exactly is the scientific method, and why are we talking about science? Science came from the word to know. It's a way of asking and answering questions about things that just naturally occur in our ecosystems and our world. There is a thing called pseudoscience. It equals false science. So science that does not investigate the supernatural. Laws, theories, and models. And I know last year you discussed laws and theories when you were talking about Newton. We just want to clarify the difference between a law and a theory. A law is something that describes patterns that have been observed in nature, like the law of gravity or the laws of motion, which you studied last year. A theory just seems to be a logical explanation of why or how things are working based on those observations. So if you've ever heard of the Big Bang Theory, how the whole universe started. We can use those laws and theories to create models or representations of an object or a process. So later this year we will create cell models to depict the different organelles within the cells, so you'll get to actually create and put hands on 3D representation. Theories and laws are accepted by scientists. They're published and usually talked about in meetings and journals and so forth, but they're not set in stone. A law or theory can be disproven. They're revised when new information is discovered. So if you might have, came up with a little bit of an explanation for the Big Bang Theory, that's been changing over and over again. It's not the same as it was 10 years ago. So is the scientific method a strict process? No. We are going to follow a process, but the steps can be interchangeable. So usually what we start an investigation with is by stating a problem or asking a question. So looking out upon observations, we're going to ask ourselves a question. So looking at this plant here, we could say, what is the effect of sunlight on how well a plant grows? And then we're going to observe. We're going to look around, we're going to use our sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, all of our five senses, and we're going to research our problem. We can also look it up on the internet, we can look in books or scientific journals. We're just going to think. And then that leads us to a prediction or a hypothesis. So we are going to predict an outcome based on that information that we researched. I like to call them if-then statements. And so I say if, and then my independent variable, then my dependent variable, because of, and then maybe some research information. So our example, if sunlight has an effect on plant growth, then the plants will grow larger in the sun because it's needed for photosynthesis. And then we can sit down and design an experiment to test our hypothesis. So it's a step-by-step procedure. First you'll do this, then you'll do this, then this, this, this. It's clear, it's detailed, so if I write out a procedure, I should be able to hand it to you and you conduct the experiment in the same way that I had done it. A lot of times people forget to list out their materials. It's important that you tell me what specific materials I need to have so I can get the same results as somebody else who were to take my procedure and follow it. In your experiment, it's important that we have two types of variables. We have our independent variable and we have our dependent variable. So the IV, or the independent variable, is what the investigator changes. So what you decide to change. We also call this the experimental group. So thinking back to our plant, this would be how much light the plant gets. We change that for each plant. And then the dependent variable changes in effect to that independent. It's what we actually measure. So in this case, we were measuring plant growth. So plant growth would be our dependent variable. And we had our group that we were making changes to. We called that the experimental group. But we need a group to compare that group to see if our independent variable caused a change. So we call that a control group. It's used for comparison. It's used as a standard. So we would compare our different amounts of light to a plant that's in dark. It didn't receive any light at all. And so to have a control group, we need to keep things constant. We need to make sure our plants were put in the same brand of soil, the same amount of soil. They received the same nutrients in their soil. They were given the same amount of water. They were put in the same type of pot, so forth. We need to keep everything the same so that we know that one variable that we changed caused the results that we're seeing. And then while we're carrying out that experiment, we're collecting data. We're writing down observations. We're describing information. That data can be one of two ways. It can be qualitative or it can be quantitative. If the data is qualitative, then it's descriptions, it's observation. What does it look like? So this plant over here is dried up, it lost all its leaves. This one over here is really green, it's growing well, it's tall. Those would be qualitative. Quantitative data would be actual numerical measurements. So if we took a measurement and noted that this plant A was 15 centimeters and plant B was 12 centimeters, then that would be quantitative data. An easy way to remember it for me is qualitative sounds like quality. So it's description, it's words describing qualities. And quantitative sounds like quantity, so it's numbers. Number 6, we will then display the data using a graph. So your line graphs, your bar graphs, your pie graphs that we've talked about earlier this week. We want to distinguish between precision and accuracy. So precision would be how close the measurements are to one another. Accuracy is how close is that measurement to the actual true value that's accepted by the scientific world. So if we measure carefully, then we're doing that precisely. If we do multiple trials for data, so like when we're going to build paper airplanes, we're going to do multiple trials. We're repeating the test so that we can increase our accuracy. Those two words are used interchangeable, but they actually have different meaning. And finally, then we can write a conclusion. So we presented our problem, we wrote a possible solution. Now we want to say whether we are accepting or rejecting that solution or our hypothesis. So we will summarize and explain, why our results were important and what they told us, and then maybe mention, okay, we didn't think about this possibility creeping up, and so we made an error. Maybe we didn't keep the actual pot the plant was potted in the same for all of our plants, and so maybe that was a source of error. Maybe a different person measured the plants every day instead of the same person measuring, which could be a source of error. And then we're going to report those findings. So if you make a lab report, if you publish your information in a journal, that's reporting your information. And you're putting it out there so that somebody else can retest that hypothesis and see if they verify your results or if they'd like to clarify results. So do you think you can name all 8 steps? Problem, observation, hypothesis, experiment, collecting data, analyzing results, conclusion, and then report your findings. Again, those 8 steps can be moved around. It's not set in stone. Any questions? Now's the time to take them.